The amount of times I've forgotten to turn on the microphone, it's going to get me, or I should learn one day. So, about to jump on with my new coach, Jackson. So, really pumped to be working with him. Really switched on guy, really good guy, really into anime and ramen, so right up my wheelhouse. I did fuck up the time zones to Perth, so we're only going to be able to steal him for a little bit of his time. Super busy guy, but yeah, hopefully he can get through some good info. And if you guys have any more questions at the end, feel free to shoot them through. Great guy to talk to anything nutrition, whether you're an athlete, whether you're just starting. And he's been putting out some really cool content on his YouTube, even TikTok recently, doing some anime segues. So definitely check him out. I'll link to his YouTube at the bottom, but I would suggest jumping on his Instagram now and following him. So Jackson Peos, really good science communicator, which is super important. It's one thing to be able to read science, which is a whole skill set. But I've got a lot of respect for science communicators, and the older I get, the more respect I have for people who can take these really advanced concepts and then break them down into something that the average person can actually do something practical with. So I think he's one of the best in the industry, definitely the best in Australia at doing that. And he's got some really big things coming up as far as career progression. So if you've got any questions, let me know. I would love to get him back on. So if you shoot down to the bottom, give this a like and a subscribe. If I can get enough comments, enough likes, people asking for him back, I might be able to steal a bit more time. So looking forward to that.
We're made into a Super Saiyan in Dragon Ball Z. It's got my tattoo on my arm there. It's got my necklace.
Would they turn me into Mega Man?
They probably could.
So
the last of the Saiyans alongside Goku and Vegeta.
How's things?
Okay. Yeah, pretty good. Not bad. Busy though. Very
Good. Yeah. Mate, do you want to just give us a little bit of a background on yourself? I guess the biggest thing that probably people know you for is nutrition and anime. How would you identify yourself?
I would identify myself as an athlete at heart, and career-wise, a nutrition researcher with a focus on allowing athletes to perform optimally at the best possible body composition. And an avid lover of anime too.
And that throws in there as well. So what got you into, was always the nutrition the goal? Because you started off doing more the sports and movement side of things?
Sports science.
Sports science.
Yeah, so no, it wasn't always the goal. Basically, I was heavily involved with sport competitively for my whole life. And that's what had pricked my interest in sports science in general. Basically, because I just started asking myself questions. How can I, what sort of strategies can I use to basically maximize the results from my training? And the answer to that is sort of start digging into the research and the science and make sure that your strategies are evidence-based. And so that's what sort of drove me into the undergraduate studies of sports science and exercise health domain. And it probably wasn't until about midway through my honors degree where we were getting sort of knee deep stuck into the more of the physiology side of things and a bit more of the complex biochemical processes and whatnot that I started really taking a passion with nutrition and wanted to have a nutrition focus. So what you'll see, the scan goes for about 7 minutes, and this is gradually just going to produce an image based on the X-ray of his full body, and it's going to look something like that. So this is his X-ray or his scan from his last assessment. And basically, I learned quite quickly from working with athletes that, especially when you're working with high level athletes, they're all training pretty damn hard. They're all doing really high volume training and they're really pushing themselves. But where you can really give an athlete an edge is often with the nutrition, because often, even with athletes playing in the best sort of leagues in our country, often the nutrition practices are very poor. And it only takes some simple adjustments, and you can get an immediate beneficial response with these athletes, which is quite remarkable. And that just can't be achieved with sort of a minor tweak to your training protocol or something like that. It certainly isn't going to be achieved in the same time frame as the benefits that you can achieve with nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think so. Is that one of the things that you see? I think athletes, I guess, going wrong with? Because I know a lot of people are always looking for, and especially trying to turn to science to try and get that edge on the competitors. And so, where would you see, I guess, that priority? Should people be prioritizing, I guess, every little extra bit they can for their nutrition?
I definitely think more focus needs to be placed on nutrition, but the thing is with training, you can get a very long way as long as you train with a high intensity and you push it, you're sort of a tough nut, and you can push past those sort of fatigue barriers. If you train really hard and have some decent genetics, you can be a successful athlete. But most people are doing that. Most people are training really, really hard. But where they can actually make strides past the competition and get a leg up over a lot of people is with the nutrition. And I don't know if nutrition is less sexy than the training, because it's all about this, like there's no such thing as like train insane, remain the same for nutrition. It's not like diet hard and be a fucking beast or anything like that. When people are talking about pushing themselves and grinding and things like that, it's regards to the training. No one's talking about grinding on the nutrition, specifically not in sports athletes. So
what are you doing with your nutrition at the moment?
My calories are a smidge over 5,000 at the moment.
All right, more food.
I think it's something to do with that. There's like just this perception of like the training is the more hardcore part, and that's the important part to be an athlete. And then the nutrition gets sort of pushed to the wayside. But I like it that way, because it means that when I start working with an athlete that hasn't had that sort of nutrition guidance in the past, they can get a 5, 10, 15% benefit or advantage just quite immediately. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is like, it's not until someone's really pushed to either end of, outside of that comfort zone, to either like a hard mass or a hard cut, that it actually does start to feel like a proper grind. But of course,
I
the
agree.
mental picture
like,
around.
Yeah, you got to remember, this is different for bodybuilders versus athletes in general. Like most competitive athletes aren't sort of taking it to the end sort of bulking phases, or taking to the end phases of like a 3% body fat cut, because obviously it's the performance is the key sort of focus, not just what your physique looks like. So yeah, I think the bodybuilding and physique community, they've probably got more experience and understanding of that grind of nutrition. But for competitive athletes who basically put performance above aesthetics, they're the ones that sort of, I think, underappreciate the value of nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're not really, there's no real value for a lot of them to push to those extreme cases, is it? So but
then that has a negative effect on them sort of undershooting what they should actually be doing. Like, yeah, you don't need to take a diet so you get 3% body fat, but I still think it's being undervalued, and athletes are missing out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know you as mostly, a lot of your articles and stuff that I've read and come across have been within the fitness, I guess within the bodybuilding space. Is there a certain direction that you would like to head? Do you have a calling towards maybe competitive athletes versus bodybuilding?
I definitely have more of a love of competitive athletes. Like I liken it to like what good is it'd be like a mechanic working on a car that's just going to sit in the shop and not actually go around the racetrack. It might look really nice, but it's never going to be able to throw down on the track. But with these athletes, like especially elite high level pro sport athletes, it's like you've got that Ferrari that looks really nice, but you get to take it out on the track and race and try to see how fast we can take this bitch sort of thing. So that's why I sort of have more of the passion in the sports athletes thing. But in terms of where do I want to head, I can see myself taking a postdoc position, probably at a university in Asia in sort of the next 12 to 18 months. And that'll be sort of a 1 to 2 year sort of tenure position with them. And then that should allow me enough time to have enough research publications behind me to sort of stock up my CV. Then I'd look to work ideally with a National Institute of Sport, maybe Australian Institute of Sport or something like that, working with some of the Commonwealth Games and Olympic athletes. That's not a great paying job or anything like that, but really good experience and looks great on the CV. And then my end game goal is to be working as sort of a high performance manager with some of those pro sport teams like NFL, NBA, and things like that.
Okay, amazing. So would you be planning on at that point then, I guess, carrying the research throughout the research side of things, or is that kind of means to an end?
Because if you I definitely have unfinished business in the research domain. Now, if you had a high performance manager position with, let's say, the Raiders, you just wouldn't have time to be sort of jumping in the lab and doing a bunch of research studies. But I reckon definitely for the next sort of 2 to 3 years, I'll still be quite deep into the research, and then I want to get sort of a little bit deeper in the trenches and actually working one-on-one with athletes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess if that's the passion, then ultimately we'll probably circle back to that. You wouldn't be eyeing up Japan as a little potential little offshoot in the career, would you? A little bit closer to the home of ramen, or? Japan's
a good one because their nutrition is just non-existent in a sense. It's their eating is very cultural and very little sort of performance focused, and it's very difficult to eat as an athlete over there. You'll be very, very hard pressed to find a fillet of lean meat anywhere that sort of has less than 20 grams of fat in it. And that's just the reality, because anything that's sort of less than that fat content is just seen as really cheap, crappy meat. And it doesn't fit with their sort of their cultural beliefs and traditions. Now, that sort of just tells me, well, geez, if you could have someone going there, working with some of the best Japanese athletes, Japan still do extremely well in a number of sports.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you could have someone there, basically giving some new insight, maybe some more Western insight to how our athletes are doing it with the nutrition side of things, and potentially could really take them a few strides ahead in terms of worldwide sport. So yeah, a spot in Japan would definitely always be on the card somewhere.
If you guys haven't, jump over to Jackson's channel and check out his eating in Japan video. We won't go into this too deep now, but I went and did a snow season in Japan, and I lost about, I think, 12 kilos in about 3 months, just because I just obviously on the mountain all day. So I left at 93 kilos and came back at, I think 82 or something, but I was sloppy at that point, because just the only thing, I was just drinking and eating rice and just trying to get carbs, whatever kind of protein I could, just QP and rice to fill you up. So cool, mate. So we'll I could pick your brains all day, but just to jump into it a little bit more, I was gonna kind of talk about where I would like to see things going, or my goals for the next kind of 15 weeks, but I thought it'd be better to get it straight from the big dog's mouth. So if you just want to run through kind of either whether it's me specifically or, kind of someone in my position where I've got a little bit of muscle mass, quite a few years training in the gym, what do you kind of lay out the next 15 weeks? The goal of just pure putting on as much muscle as possible. What's kind of plan of attack?
Yeah, so you're what I consider a moderate body fat level. So not too lean, not too fat.
So it's been mean to me, guys.
Now, if you were leaner, then we would have progressed with a little bit more of an aggressive sort of push up in weight right off the bat, just because people who are leaner tend to be a little bit more efficient with the muscle gain, with more of the nutrients going towards lean tissues and less of the nutrients ingested going towards fat tissues. And it sort of flips a little bit as you get fatter and fatter and fatter. So we'll be taking quite a conservative approach with your gaining phase. I'm targeting around 0.2 to 0.4% of body weight gains per week. So you can do the math on that. As long as we're staying sort of, and we're going to have some weeks where we slip in and out of that. But if we average it out over the 15 weeks, I'm expecting that should be where the average sits. And usually that's the way it pans out when I work with athletes during gain phase. So it's quite a conservative and slow mass. Again, factoring in that body fat isn't super lean, but also making sure that we're spending good consecutive time in a surplus, because a lot of people fail to understand that building muscle has both an energy component, like calories, but also has a time component. So you can't smash in all those calories over 6 weeks. And expect to grow a bunch of muscle, because you're not satisfying the time component of muscle gain. So what we do is we stretch it out for longer. So we're satisfying that time component. We just go a little bit slower. And what that means is we're still probably going to be growing the same amount of muscle mass than we otherwise would have if we just loaded calories really, really high, because muscle gain has quite a low per week ceiling, and going above that calorie level, usually the excess just gets deposited as fat. So we're probably going the same amount of muscle as if we were going much more aggressive, but with far less fat gain. So I like to push up to at least 15 weeks. Probably if body fat's still looking okay by the end of 15 weeks, and maybe push it to 20 weeks. And then usually I recommend sort of gaining consecutively for 4 times as long as you cut. So then we could jump into a 4 to 5 week mini cut. After that, drop about 5 or 6 kilos, with a bunch of that being food weight, glycogen, and fluid. And then that should reveal a pretty nice looking physique with some new muscle. So that's my rough plan for you at the moment.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, awesome. There's a lot to unpack there. Do you generally work off how much is numbers, I guess, for you, and how much, obviously from a science background, how much is numbers and how much is kind of I guess dependent on the athlete? You know, is it going to be like when I hit a certain body fat percentage, or do you generally work with kind of how the person's kind of carrying the weight?
A few factors. So number one is visuals is a good one. From after years and years in this, I have a pretty good eye now, and I can pretty much say, yeah, okay, that's a 10 to 12, or that's a 15 to 16. And I know what sort of body fat levels tend to grow well and what sort of tend to be less efficient with growing muscle. So I'll just be keeping an eye on your physique every 2 weeks, making sure that our weight loss trajectory is on track. And then around about that, I won't be cutting things off any shorter than 15 weeks, but around that 15 to 20 week mark, I'll be really sort of paying attention to the physique and how it looks, and if it looks like we're responding well, or perhaps we're getting to that body fat threshold where things are just a little less efficient. So that's one So that's one factor. Another factor is basically the subjective stuff coming from the athlete. So if you start saying you're feeling really sluggish, potential body image issues, which I hope I can talk you out of, because it's sometimes but it's a real issue, because often people like the idea of gaining muscle, but they don't like the requirement to look a little worse than you would love to. And that's what, sadly, why a lot of people don't actually gain muscle in the long term, because they start gaining, they stack up maybe 6 or 7 weeks, but then they cut things short before they can actually really get some momentum and some productive training and growing, because a little bit of fat comes over the abs and they don't like the look of that. And then they're back into a mini cut, and they're sort of just always chasing their tail. So, And another thing is appetite is a big one as well. So if your appetite's just really, really tanking and food's just becoming a massive chore, then sometimes I will pull the cut just a little bit shorter, sort of a little bit earlier, and then we jump into a cut. Hunger signals resensitize, insulin sensitivity resensitizes, and then we do that for 4 to 6 weeks, and then we can push back to gaining when appetite is normalized.
Yeah, very cool. I think that's always something that I talk to my guys and girls a lot about is, realistically, like everyone wants to talk about, all the memes about pushing outside your comfort zone. But realistically, like there's the comfort zone of, well, shit, I don't actually feel like eating anymore. But then there's actually the comfort zone of, I don't even like how I look anymore. And that's really both of those ends of outside the comfort zone, a little bit too lean and a little bit too big is both pretty much where most of the progress is going to be made. If you are within your comfort zone, then yeah, you're making some progress, but realistically, it's your comfort zone for a reason. Yeah,
like even my mass gain, like everyone is under the assumption that sort of I have no issues and everything comes to me easy, but like I was absolutely uncomfortable with my body image issues, and I had fleeting thoughts of, hey, fuck, maybe I should pull this a little bit earlier, but then I have to sort of ground myself and be like, hey, hang on. Say to yourself was the same thing you say to your clients. It's
absolutely,
like, trust in the process and understand the time course that muscle that takes, and accept that the body fat's part and parcel of the process.
Yeah, and so I guess that's a big takeaway for anyone watching as well, is that I know you when we're talking about those 15-week or 20-week kind of massing phases, is that's really dependent on being in a minimal, or at least a smaller surplus than most people are. When they go straight to the hamburgers and shit, then they're going to put on too much weight too quickly, and then you're not going to survive 15 weeks because you're going to put on 10 kilos in the first 2. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, we might call it then. Mate, thanks so much for jumping on. Really appreciate that. And yeah, looking forward to another week until gyms are up and running. So I've got all my oats all teed up. So looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, man, I'm pumped for it. I'm excited to see what we can do.
Sounds good. Thank you, mate. Really appreciate that. Chat soon.
Catch you later.
Thanks, Jackson. Also, this is not, full disclosure, this is not the first time I've stuffed up a time zone. I actually had a job interview once with a company called Ultimate Performance when I was first moving to Melbourne, and I was interviewing for a position in Marbella, I don't know how to say that, in Spain, and I had the time zone to London or somewhere, wherever I was chatting to them, and I messed up that time zone, so I messed up my job interview. I had to wait another few months until they could schedule another time with me. But that was the single most unpleasant job interview I've ever been a part of. It was so hostile. And I don't know if you guys have ever come to a job interview before where you feel like you're being attacked, but that's what it was. And so I walked away from that not particularly pumped, but I had to wait like 4 months for the whole process to be completed because I messed up the time zone. So I don't know whether they were holding a grudge or it's just what it was like, but they didn't even turn on their camera. It was me on camera at 1 a.m. and then 2 people on the other side of a blank screen just attacking me. It was a very weird process. Don't ever want to go through that again. So